the little things in life can make a big difference. It's why Mobility Works has been helping people connect with who and what matters most since 1997. Our clients have unique needs, so we treat each of them as individuals. First of all, we listen. Then, we work together to find the best solution. Last, we custom fit clients with precisely the right wheelchair-accessible solution. Rest assured that our relationship doesn't end there. We stay connected so you remain completely satisfied. With locations across the country featuring the largest selection of accessible vehicles and adaptive solutions, including minivans and full-size vans, SUVs and trucks, wheelchair and scooter lifts, turning and transfer seats, hand controls, wheelchair securement, and docking systems. Call us today to learn more about our selection of accessible vehicles and adaptive solutions.
All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us on this Monday morning as we kick off the first day of our Assistive Technology Week. We are thrilled to have Kiera Berggren here to present on Lowtech communication. She is a speech-language pathologist in the Department of Neurology at Virginia Commonwealth University. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the chat feature on Zoom or comment section on Facebook. Those questions will be answered either during the presentation or at the end. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kiera, who will go ahead and share her screen.
Good morning. Thank you so much for getting up early for those that might be on the West Coast. And welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, hopefully that is coming through okay. So I'm here to talk a little bit about augmentative and alternative communication and ALS. And I'm happy to answer questions along the way, just depending on if people want to jump in on anything. So go ahead and get started here. So a couple of disclosures. I am a consultant for the Critical Path Institute and have received an honorarium, served as a consultant, otherwise have no other financial disclosures. I wanted to give a little bit of guideline on what the talk is going to be today. So some kind of goals for the talk. First off, why is communication important? And then what is AAC in general? It's a term we throw around a lot that it's a little bit easier to say than augmentative and alternative communication, but it's a pretty broad term. So what all does it encompass? And then what are some low-tech options that we can use to help support communication? So first and foremost, what is communication and why is it so important? We're using it all the time, every day. We use it to share ideas, pass along information, tell our story, whether that's verbally with somebody or maybe through a memoir or a diary or something like that, or even recording ourselves for our grandchildren, things like that. We communicate as well to connect with others. Obviously, in the setting of COVID, that's changed a little bit in terms of how that communication and connection looks. But it's such a need in human nature that we're pretty driven to help or to continue to connect with individuals. And then last but definitely not least, I like to include with all my patients a conversation about alerting somebody if you need something in an emergency, and that's, I feel, a very important part of the whole communication package. So a few definitions quickly to kind of get us all on the same page. Speech, when we as speech language pathologists refer to speech, we're talking about the actual act of making the sounds that we use in our language. This means moving our mouth, our tongue, our lips, using our voice box, controlling our respiration, how quickly we're exhaling, all of these things. It also looks at that fluency piece. So if somebody is very fluent as they're speaking or maybe has a bit of a stutter, And it also depends a little bit on what a term that you may have seen in reading about ALS is what's called dysarthria. So dysarthria really just means a speech disorder or a difficulty with speech. And there's a bunch of different types out there, classification systems that are out there that we mostly use on the medical side. But the most common that you may read about in ALS are flaccid dysarthria or spastic dysarthria. And I'll talk a little bit about those in just a little more about those in just a moment. But the degree of dysarthria changes over the course of the disease. So somebody may present initially in without any dysarthria at all, and that may vary, from visit to visit. Language is another term that we use. This is really a thinking skill or a cognitive skill where we use sort of the agreed upon symbols in our culture to put together words that help share ideas and really help with that communication piece. And language can be written, it can be oral as we're doing right now, it can be visual if it's sign language. So there's a bunch of different sort of modalities that one might consider with language. And then there's communication, the sort of broader definition. So we need speech and language to communicate, or we use speech and language to communicate, but we can communicate in other ways as well too, through pictures. Is a big one, right? For anybody that's online on Snapchat or Instagram or things like that. That's another way of communicating, and it's another way of sort of sharing ideas, information. Desire, something that we need, that kind of thing. So some factors in ALS that may affect speech and subsequently communication is that muscle weakness and that progressive muscle weakness that can happen with the disease over the course of the disease. Spasticity can also be an issue for some patients as well, depending on sort of the presentation. And this can affect all of these muscles that we use with communicate with speech. And it can mean that maybe our muscles aren't moving as much as they normally might. So maybe instead of smiling with a big smile, we can only smile with a small smile. Maybe that speed of movement is decreased as well. This can certainly affect muscles that are involved in our respiratory system, which is obviously very important as well for that verbal communication piece. So if our diaphragm or the muscles in our chest wall area maybe are affected by the disease, that can affect communication as well too. And the piece that I always like to remind people of is fatigue is also very much a factor in the setting of ALS. So sometimes communication conversations that I have with patients in clinic revolve around that energy conservation. And you'll see that in just a few moments as well with something we'll talk about. So what is AAC? As I mentioned, it is a mouthful to say augmentative and alternative communication all the time. So we generally always abbreviate it AAC. And it's really a term, a kind of catch-all term to encompass any form of communication that happens other than verbal communication, whether that's somebody writing something down, using sign language, facial expressions. You can see I tend to use those quite a bit, gestures as well, and technology. We use technology, we're using it right now, whether it's through video conferencing or through email or any sorts of mechanism that way. And I like to remind people we all use these things and we all use them every single day. Back in the day, it used to be we just had a telephone, and now, we have so many other options for communicating. And these forms of communication really depend a lot on whether how our hearing is, how our vision is, how our thinking skills are, as well as the people that we may be communicating with. So if I'm speaking with my 89-year-old father-in-law, it's going to be a very different type of communication because he has fairly significant hearing loss than it might be with a 5-year-old that lives down the street that wants to pet my dog. So it's just very different, and we all kind of switch how we communicate depending on the setting that we're in. So what are some low-tech options that are out there for communication? There is a range of options, and really my job as a speech language pathologist is to help identify what's going to work for a patient and their family. So some really kind of low tech, no tech options, I like to say sometimes, are even just things like the facial expressions I mentioned earlier. So we have 10 pictures here of this woman, and she's communicating a whole bunch of things with these 10 images here, from that she's kind of content, maybe a little bit bored, to happy, to sad, to angry, to shocked, and she's not saying anything to us. This is a static picture of this woman. And so you can see facial expressions convey a lot of information. Gestures as well, certainly head movements, whether we're nodding or shaking our head or something like that. And one of the things that I always like to talk with my patients about are those head movements and eye movements and facial expressions. So for somebody who maybe is really having difficulty speaking, the conversation, the burden of the conversation may fall more on the communication partner, and they may be asking questions that are more yes/no questions. But if somebody's maybe having a little more difficulty nodding their head or shaking their head, then establishing a really consistent yes/no can be very helpful. So I've had patients where the communication partner may hold up both hands and ask a yes/no question, and the person can just look to one hand for one answer and the other hand for another answer. Or I've had ones where they blink really hard for one and then look up for another option. And there's all sorts of variations on a theme. And I've seen a ton of different options, and it just depends on individual preference. I do like to encourage people to have what I call an "it's something else" option. So if somebody's offering you something and it's neither yes nor no, it's really something else. Maybe if we're using the hand signals, there could be yes, there could be no, and there could be try again kind of option. So there's a lot that we can convey without actually having to verbally communicate, just by using our facial expressions. So to get a little bit into the augmentative technology side of things, if I have somebody that I'm seeing in the multidisciplinary clinic I'm in at BCU, and they're maybe a little bit quieter than they've always been, it takes a lot of energy to get louder in certain communication settings. So perhaps something like a portable voice amplifier might be an option for us, where we can, there's a picture on the left of the hand with a little bit of a speaker in it. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse on the screen, but a hand with a small speaker in it, just to give you an idea of the size on it. This is the Spokesman, and if you go to their website that I have listed down below, you can see the speaker itself, as well as different options for purchase for the microphone settings on it. And then the next picture that I have is of the Chatterbox. So this is an older, I shouldn't say that, it's been around for a long time, device that was one of the early sort of portable voice amplifiers. And it has a speaker in kind of a fanny pack that the person can wear, and then a headset for a microphone. Both of these have been around for a while. There are a ton of inexpensive options out there as well. What we are finding within the community is that those may have a little bit more feedback. And so if you prefer good quality on this, the Spokesman or the Chatterbox may be a little bit better of an option for you. And one of the things I wanted to bring in was this video of this gentleman who is seeing a colleague of mine up in Boston. And he is giving a little bit of a talk on, why this voice amplification works so well for him. So let's listen to him.
Well, one of the reasons why I like the amplifier, it saves my voice energy so that I do not get as tired in the evening. And I need to remind myself more every day to use it more. Because the first reason when I get tired at night it's because probably exhausted from expending my voice. But with this amplifier, I can talk slower and also not as loud because the amplification, which is everybody can hear.
So he is an individual with ALS and is using that portable voice amplifier to help save some energy for himself, which is, I thought was a good description of it. There's some other sort of no tech or kind of low tech options out there as well. So for some individuals who maybe initially have difficulty with speech, but their hand function is just fine or working well enough, you know, writing can be a great way to sort of augment that communication. So I've had patients use small whiteboards or a little spiral bound notebook that they just slip in their pocket. One of the really popular ones is the boogie board, which I have a picture of on the right-hand side. That's an electronic version of a whiteboard, essentially, and it has a little button up in the center top that you can just press when you want to, after you've written your message and you want to erase it, you just press that button. I do encourage people to, you know, if we have more difficulty gripping small things, we can certainly work with you and our occupational therapy colleagues to maybe bulk up that stylus or that pen a little bit, put a foam tube on it or wrap it in Coban or something like that. And one of the tips that I got from our local ALSA chapter here is just using a string to attach that writing implement to whatever it is. So I call it kind of the mittens on a string phenomenon, where you just make sure it's always attached there, especially the stylus for the boogie board can very easily get misplaced, and so it's nice to have it attached. Some other options of communication that is really requires no actual technology in terms of an electronic device or something like that is maybe a communication board. There are millions of examples out there. The one that I have put on here is one that was generated for more of a hospital setting. So it has things on there like, I want to see the doctor or the nurse. You know, it has medical requirements on there, like, you know, if you're trying to communicate, you feel short of breath or you're tired, or, you know, I always encourage there to be emotions on these communication boards. You know, certainly if you want to be suctioned or have it be quiet or things like that. And these can be customized. There's a lot of different ways we can do this. And I also like to encourage as well to, when you customize it, put on there things like, I had one individual who had a couple cats, and so would occasionally get cat hair in his mask, and so that was an important thing for him to put on there. So really identifying those things that might be unique for a particular individual. And I'll give a couple more examples on the next slide here. So one can also use like an alphabet board, like I have kind of depicted here sort of in the middle. This one is, all of them are sort of easily usable with partner assisted scanning, or what we call partner assisted scanning, where the individual, the communication partner, may have the piece of paper in hand and point to the first line of the letters if somebody is trying to spell something out. Is it in this row? No. Okay. Is it in this row? No. Okay. Is it in this row? Until we get to the row, and then point along the row until we get to that target letter. You know, I always encourage there to be a yes, no option on there as well, and then it's something else if that's reasonable for you. You can use an alphabet board, or you can even just create a written document, whether that's something handwritten or typed up in Word like I've done here, that maybe has some commonly requested things. The one I put on here is one that I generated for maybe common requests that might happen at night. And so you might have all of these things that are maybe something that somebody commonly requests in the middle of the night. You don't want to get out a computer or a phone or something like that to communicate a simple, quick message. So having something like this, you know, even in like a sheet protector or a cold laminating pouch or something like that, can just make these communication back and forth really quick in those moments. As I mentioned on the last slide, maybe there's some time of day requirements as well. So middle of the night, these might be some options for you. Middle of the day, maybe that looks more like, I'm hungry, or please let the dog out, or whatever those might be that are unique to you. The thing I like about if you place these in a sheet protector is that they have 3 holes along the side, so you can put them in a 3-ring binder, and you can actually put a little clip on them and then have all of them together. So the middle of the night ones, the middle of the day ones, during a meal ones, getting dressed ones, things like that. And you can just have this kind of with the person at all times, or make multiple versions of them and leave them in strategic places so that we don't lose them like we do our reading glasses. The nice option for these as well too is that for somebody who maybe is using a computer to talk for them, and there'll be more on high-tech communication later in the week, then say you're in the shower or something like that, you're not going to want that computer there. So having something like this to communicate things that commonly may come up during those moments can be really important, and a little bit easier for that communication piece. You're protecting the computer, you don't have it there, but you're also still able to communicate. The picture on the bottom are some communication books generated. The icons in there are generated from a software program. Many ALSA offices may have access to this program. It's called Boardmaker, or many SLPs may also have access to it, so you can make your own. I've made them in the past for patients in other languages or with specific medications listed on there. And so those can be handy. And in a book format like that, you can maybe put tabs on them and flip to the desired page, whether that's emotions or food or whatever it might be. There's obviously, with those, I was talking about partner assisted scanning, but you can also use other means of access. And this is where I work really closely with my my OT colleagues to help me figure out good ways that might work for a given individual for access. So maybe using a laser pointer. And this afternoon, I encourage people that are interested in some of these lower tech, inexpensive options. This afternoon will be a talk by Margaret at Lowtech Solutions, and she can talk she likely will talk a little bit more about this, but I borrowed this picture from her website. But you can have a laser that maybe laser pointer that clips onto the eyeglasses, or there's ones that will clip onto the brim of a baseball hat or something like that. Of course, don't shine that laser in somebody's eyes, but if you use this in conjunction with one of those communication boards, it gives the person trying to communicate with the board a little more independence. You're not relying on that partner quite as much. So another option as well are switches. Again, I'm not an occupational therapist, but I did want to show this a little bit of this video. We won't watch the whole thing, that talks a little bit about switches as well.
For the right individual, switch scanning is a simple yet highly effective way of navigating your chosen communication program. This access method is achieved by means of gross or fine body movement, where the pressing of a switch controls selections. The individual hits the switch when the target item is highlighted on screen. Switches can also come in a variety of forms and sizes that cater for different body movements, such as pressing the switch with the hand or the head. One of the advantages of switch scanning is that it involves a very simple setup, which is excellent for any new users. Position a device and plug in a switch USB or the cable accessory, and you are ready to go. There is a wide selection of switches available to suit the chosen body movement of the individual. Hand and head movements can be catered for by flat switches, which can come in varying sizes. Should only feather-light touch be possible, options such as micro switches and finger buttons can be used. Other body movements may require more robust foot switches, and there is also the possibility of grasp switches.
Okay, and I'm going to pause it there. One of the things I do like to point out is that everybody knows Stephen Hawking, and one of the things that he used actually was a switch like that, but it was on a left cheek muscle. So it's not necessarily just hand or head or something like that. It can be elbow, it can be shoulder, it can be knee. I've had all sorts of varieties. So there's a ton of options out there, and this is where we work closely with our OT colleagues to kind of help identify the best way for access. One of my favorites that I recommend fairly frequently to my patients in the clinic setting is this Etran board. And again, Margaret will probably talk a little bit more about this afternoon as well too. But the Etran board is basically a communication board where there's boxes that are bordered in different colors. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but this one's red and this one is orange. The upper left is red, the middle lower one is orange. And the letters and numbers in each individual rectangle are also color coded to coordinate with the colors that are along the board as well too. So it's a plastic plexiglass piece, and there's different iterations out there. But you can see the picture in the middle, the communication partner is on one side. On the side that is facing the communication partner is the same pattern so that you can see what the person is indicating. So for example, if somebody was going to spell the word cat, first they would look up towards the upper left so they could tell you that it's in that first box up in the upper left hand corner. And then they would look again at that same area to tell you the color of the letter or number that they're looking for. So excuse me, they would look in the upper right for the C in cat to tell you they're looking at the blue letter in that first box. So letter first, then color. Then for the A, they would look up in that upper left box and then again in that box to indicate it's in this box and it's the first letter in that box because it's the red one. And then for the letter T, they're going to look down at the lower middle box to indicate it's in that box. And then they're going to indicate back at that as well to indicate that it's the orange item in that box. It sounds a lot more cumbersome than it actually is in practice. The really nice thing about this is what I hear from patients is that once the communication partner has the pattern down, and once the patient has the pattern down, you actually don't need the board. And so now you picture a setting where somebody is in the shower, maybe doing hydrotherapy or something like that, and they are able to still communicate, but they don't need any tools with them. So it can be very helpful. It relies on sort of the word prediction capabilities and the memory of the communication partner. You know, I can follow somebody spelling cat, but if you're trying to spell to me catastrophe, that might take me a little bit longer to try and remember all those letters. So sometimes the communication partner may write stuff down as well too, so they can keep track of the letters that have been used. Some other low-tech options out there, or light tech options, depending on your terminology, is basically anything that maybe has a computer chip. So up till now, we haven't really talked, other than potentially the boogie board, about something that might have a computer chip in it. But there's a whole bunch of options out there. And I think in the 6 or 7 years I've been in ALS clinics, the option for applications for communication with smartphones and on tablets has just taken off. And if you pair that with like a Bluetooth speaker or something like that, you can really improve communication for individuals. So some examples out there. You can use these both on smartphones and many of them on tablets as well too. So I'll talk about iPhone in just a moment, but on the Android side, I've listed a few apps for you here. Probably one of my favorites these days is Speech Assistant. It is one I loaded on my phone. I use it in clinic to demonstrate pretty frequently. And I like it because it has on it categories of items. So in the gray, there's some categories, and then below with the white background are items within the category. And what you can't see in this static picture is that if you scroll on this, there's more options down below. So there can be quite a lot of options in there within a given category. And you can customize this. So the first one on the left, I don't know how easy it is to see, but it says, my name is Tom. Well, obviously my name is not Tom. So the first thing I would do is go in and customize that and put in, my name is Kiera. I have found that with my name in particular, to get it to say all the syllables, I have to put a hyphen in there. So to sort of force it to pronounce it correctly, but you can tweak it with things like that. But communication isn't a static sort of thing. There isn't, there aren't 20 things we say each day. There's hundreds and hundreds of things that we say each day that are novel, that we wouldn't be able to capture in something like this with stored phrases. So there is also the option to bring up the keyboard and just type in novel things as well too. So if you want to talk about, the hockey game that happened this last weekend, that you were interested in, that's clearly not going to get stored in there. So you want to be able to have that option. And you can also change the settings in it. You can just change the display. So it's a big display if you're working with somebody, or if you were somebody who maybe has some vision issues. You can change the voice setting in there. There's, how fast it speaks, how slow it speaks, what language it speaks in. There's just a ton of different options in there. Apps can range from free, which is nice. There's a free version of Speech Assistant, or there's kind of the pro version, all the way up to, apps that maybe cost a couple $100. I've had quite a few patients use Let Me Talk or Speak For Me and really enjoy those apps as well too. So there's a bunch of different options. In the iPhone and iPad world, there are equally millions of options, maybe not millions, but quite a few options out there. Speech Assistant is available on that side. Other ones that have worked really well for patients are like Proloquo for text, or the older text-to-speech app. Verbally is what I have depicted here. So it's a little bit different layout, where you have the keyboard, you have words that are maybe commonly used, phrases as well. And with this one, you can, and with most apps these days, you can utilize the word prediction capabilities that's inherent in the operating system itself too, which can help speed up communication. With some of these apps as well, they will use phrase prediction technology. So if you might commonly say, I need to go work on my laptop, and you have that as kind of a stored phrase, maybe typing in the word laptop will help pull that phrase up for you, because it's a high frequency one. So it uses that prediction capability or algorithm. So the screenshot, and again, these are customizable. The screenshot on the right just is meant to show that there's different voice options within them. Obviously, the more you pay, the more bells and whistles you get with this. And I know later in the week, there's going to be a conversation on voice banking and message banking. With many of these, you can use a banked voice as well, which is nice. So up till now, we've been really talking about, for the last few slides, about if somebody isn't able to speak very well, but speaking verbally, as I mentioned a while back, is not the only way we communicate. We email with people, we write things down, we send pictures, things like that. So the flip side then is, if I'm working with somebody who maybe isn't able to use their hands or a switch even to touch a keyboard or touch an on-screen keyboard or something like that, maybe we want to use some software that has some voice recognition. So certainly Siri and the Google system as well have pretty nice speech recognition options in there. There is also a software package out there that's been out for 25 years, Dragon Naturally Speaking, that you can use to dictate. If you can use it to control your computer, you can tell it to open Word, open a browser, minimize things. The nice thing about Dragon Naturally Speaking is that you can actually calibrate it to your voice. So I've had patients use it pretty successfully in the past, even as their voice may be changing with progressing dysarthria. They can sort of recalibrate the system to their current voice, which can be very helpful. And unfortunately, you can't do that quite as well with Google and with Siri, but with all the different operating systems out there, whether it's a Mac or a PC or, Apple phone or an Android phone or something like that, there's been a really big push within the industry to have more accessibility options. So maybe better voice control, being able to use a switch with it, the speech to text option. I use that all the time, sometimes to interesting results, but the speech to text option to write messages and use that word prediction capability. These are all ways to kind of help with communication. There is also some other sort of computer-based augmentative communication. There's certainly the smart home technology world, which I would say probably in the last 3 years has been an absolute game changer for my neuromuscular patients and specifically for my patients with ALS. So whether it is using something like He Who Shall Not Be Named, because there's one near me, and Google Home, you can make phone calls, you can write messages, email people, you can, I can talk with her to make an announcement in another room, or I can drop in and listen in another room to what's going on. I can certainly inadvertently shop. I can have either one of these smart home technology platforms. I can listen to books, I can read the news, listen to the news, turn on the radio, listen to podcasts, all of this. And the nice piece that I like to let patients know about is that I think we all think that these are only voice activated options, but actually if you have that app available on your phone or on a computer or a tablet or something like that, you can actually control She Who Shall Not Be Named and Google Home through that as well too, so you don't actually need to communicate verbally. There's a whole world out there of assistive technology that I think there's a talk on later in the week, so I'm not going to get into it anymore, but know that there's a bunch of options for communication using smart home technology. As I mentioned early on in the talk, I feel like alerting is a big form of communication that, especially in populations that I work with, can be very, very important. So letting people know if there's an emergency or something like that. So, I will frequently ask patients, how do you get attention if you need it? Whether that's using the button on the wheelchair, and I'll have them do it right there in clinic, and or having an alarm button that maybe is on your pillow that you roll over and kind of hit with your head, or a wireless doorbell. I know that's a pretty popular one as well. Those wireless doorbells have increasing range on them, so it's nice because you can have the doorbell attached to the wheelchair or on something that is with you as a patient, and then have the speaker remote with whomever else you are trying to communicate with, whichever care partner that might be. So they can maybe be outside gardening or something like that, but still be able to hear you. I've certainly had patients that have repurposed and family members that have repurposed baby monitors. As I mentioned a moment ago, that drop-in feature that's available through smart home technology. There's watches that you can wear that have alerting systems on them, or certainly a life alert system. And whenever we talk about any of these, I usually will work really closely with my occupational therapy colleagues to help address any need for adaptation with that. So for example, the wireless doorbell, many of them are about the size of kind of a traditional doorbell, but maybe we put like a little piece of plywood on there or plexiglass or something like that that enlarges the surface size. And so instead of having to try and hit something with a very fine movement, now we have a more of a paddle that we're trying to hit, and that's going to be a little bit easier for us. One that I always bring up with my patients as well is a skill out there called Ask My Buddy. The verbiage that I've put on this slide is actually taken directly from their website that I've linked below. It's a free service that allows you to use smart home technology to alert people if you need something. for safety reasons, you can't tell she who shall not be named to call 911, because then every child would be calling 911 all over the place. So this isn't meant to be a substitute for 911, but you can use it to, when you go in and set the system up, you can put in their, phone numbers, emails that you want people to be texted at or called or emailed. And then when you say, ask my buddy to send help, it will already know, okay, when that phrase is used, here's the people I need to contact, and it will broadcast out a message for you. So it's a great service, and I think especially for people who maybe have difficulty grabbing the phone or something like that, you can do this. And again, you can, through the Alexa app on your tablet or something like that, you can access this as well. So I hope through all of this, I've given you a little bit more information about augmentative and alternative communication, and hopefully brought home the idea that as a speech language pathologist, we can help. This is our job. We get trained on this, and not everybody kind of specializes in this area, but certainly if you're having communication difficulties, I encourage you to reach out to an SLP, either in your multidisciplinary clinic locally, or if you're remote from your clinic and you have to travel to it, maybe there's somebody in your local community that can work with you on this. And our job is to look at language and communication and cognition and think about what's going to work best for the individual and the family that I'm working with. And certainly in the setting of the progressive diseases out there, monitoring that over time. So certainly every 3 months or so when I see patients in clinic, I'm touching base with them. How's communication going? Is there anything we need to change? Are you still able to get attention? All of that. And tweaking it along the way. And maybe that's a referral to our assistive technology specialist at our local chapter, or reaching out to the Gleason Foundation for support from them or something like that. So it's a changing process. I hope I've also imparted as well that it's not a one size fits all. What works for me may not work for you, and likely won't work for you. Every situation is very unique, and communication is such a dynamic process that really changes over the course of the day. If somebody's really fatigued, maybe that's the time to use the portable voice amplifier, but first thing in the morning, maybe they feel like they don't need it, or they're in the shower and don't want to bring technology in there. So bringing in some of the no-tech or low-tech kind of options can be really helpful. And of course, it varies by with whom we're speaking. If I am working with a family that we're thinking about maybe a little bit higher tech communication option, but the care partner or spouse isn't very comfortable with technology, that's going to impact as well what we're thinking of and trying to formulate a plan that's going to work for everybody within the group. So thank you so much for listening in on this beautiful sunny day. This is a lovely picture of downtown Richmond across the river from the James, and in the height of summer when everything's green and blooming here. So thank you so much, and I'll take any questions.
And again, if you did not join at the beginning of the presentation, if you have any questions, please comment them on the Facebook Live chat or on Zoom, the chat feature. So we'll wait a couple minutes and see if any questions come in.
I'm excited. You guys have a lot of good things planned for later in the week, so it'll be great.
We are very excited too. Thank you so much, Kiera, for doing this. Of course. It was wonderful. I am not seeing any comments right now, but if any comments come in, I will send you an email with them. Again, thank you so much for presenting today. It was awesome. And thank you everyone for joining on this Monday morning. Again, we are presenting live at 1 p.m. with Margaret Kotz from Lowtech Solutions, and she will also be going over some of the Lowtech equipment that Kiera presented on today. So if you're interested, please join on the same link that we sent out on the email or on our Facebook page. And if you have any questions, please send Ray Varner or myself an email. All right. Thanks again.
Great.